wired up again to start the first actual thematic session of the agenda. It's called Institutional Strengthening for the NDAs. I just want to quickly introduce, I think this is a key part of the work that's not normally what we think when we say Green Climate Fund readiness. I think the immediate thought that comes to mind is, great, we have readiness support, we're going to have projects. And in reality, what we've realized is that, I wouldn't say it's more important, but it's just as important is to have sort of your house organized, to have different committees and mechanisms that are joining different institutions to ensure that everything that is being put forward to the Green Climate Fund is actually aligned with national development strategies and national determined contributions and all these other national and subnational processes in countries that already exist, so that this is not something that we're doing one-off, but rather it's part of the same process, and to make sure that there is a standard operating procedure going forward of screening and proposing projects to the Green Climate Fund, and then how to actually better implement them. So even though this is not normally, like, I would say, the sexiest part of readiness, it's incredibly important, and a lot of work has been put on this in this program. And I'm just going to now introduce our two speakers. We have Ghana and Nepal bringing the experiences first, and then we have a panel where we'll include Colombia as well. So Ayirebi Frimpong, you're on.
Right, so good morning once again. Basically, as she said, Claudia indicated, institutional strengthening really is a key component. Putting your house in order before you start, that's really something that you should do logically, but sometimes it can be a big challenge. So this presentation really will just highlight key things. Why did we have to do this capacity strengthening? How did we do it and when, which is, I think, very key. And then also would touch a bit on the lessons. But of course, as I go through, I'll highlight some of the lessons along the way. And then I'll just put in an additional lesson learned in that particular process. So why? I think this has been said, in the earlier presentations, really. The first part, that the GCF, at the time we started this, was still evolving, and a lot of new processes that the countries were being exposed to. So naturally, you would need to let people understand and get a bit of capacity in terms of what they are supposed to do, why they even need to do that. And that was quite key. The second part is that Ghana's NDA that was chosen was the Ministry of Finance. Now, traditionally in Ghana, this was Ministry of Environment handling everything climate related. So now you have a situation where you have the Ministry of Finance with people who are interested in budgets and economics. And then we say you have to deal with climate change, the finance part of it. So you needed to really provide them with a certain amount of skills and systems that allows them to be better placed to be able to do that effectively. And that is why this was quite key. Also, you are now introducing to them new systems of doing things, even though they are current structures. But then, obviously, with the GCF, that meant that they needed to have additional systems in terms of, for example, project selection, in terms of dealing with accredited entities, and so on and so forth. And therefore, this was important. The bigger picture also, as we were seeing from Ghana, was the idea that this was not just about the GCF. This is really beyond the GCF. It's about climate finance in general. So you needed to have them in a capacity, in a way that they could have oversight in terms of dealing with climate finance, in terms of the whole MRV process. And so this was quite key, and that is why, capacity was really important for us in Ghana. So I think in Ghana, really, what I like to call the TSS, in terms of capacity building, that is really what you need to remember from the perspective of Ghana. It's about tools, the skills, and the systems, really. For us, it's about tools, because you need to have the right kind of tools to be able to guide people, to provide guidance, to have standard operating processes for them, and these will have to be enhanced through tools. But then with the tools goes specific skills to be able to do these kind of work, and so skills needed to be enhanced. Like I said, these were finance people, not climate-related people. So of course, certain amount of capacity building on general ideas of climate change, what are the principles behind climate change. These are things that people struggled with in the beginning. So we realized that that was a big gap and that needed to be dealt with. And then of course you have the whole systems that needs to be in place, the whole systems that should guide decision making, for example, when it comes to projects, when it comes to engaging with stakeholders. These are things that needs to be all work together as one, and you can see that they are all interlinked in one way or the other. So in terms of the tools, this is really how we looked at it in Ghana. In Ghana, we had 3 key tools that were developed. So we had first the NDA manual to guide the NDA. We had the prioritization tool to help in project selection. And then you had also beyond just GCF, you had the MRV system and the tracking system that would help you to deal with climate finance going forward beyond GCF readiness. So when it comes to the NDA operations manual, really we were looking at certain key things. The key elements of this particular tool was the sort of processes that will allow you to come to the issue of no objection. So in Ghana, in fact, the no objection process was really about, at a time, and as you can see there, we were dealing with a time when we had no country programs. So the whole idea at the time when we had that NDA manual was that, well, people would need to identify projects. Now, when people identify projects, these projects needed to be aligned to what we would normally describe generally as the country priorities, right? And these would normally be what you find in your NDCs, or in Ghana, we will also have the National Climate Change Policy. So, I mean, these are things that should be aligned. And then once they are aligned, it would definitely be aligned with a particular sector ministry, whether it's energy or it's agriculture or it's transport. It will be aligned with one of these. And so at that level, you needed to have a certain kind of engagement with these ministries or sectors. And then they would buy into the concept. They would look at your concept and say, okay, this concept is in line with what we want to do as a ministry, as a sector. And therefore, based on that, they would give you an approval letter. And then you add that to your project idea or concept, submit it to the NDA, who would then, together with the setup that was supposed to help or is supposed to help the NDA, that is the Technical Advisory Committee, which basically is useful because the NDA, like I said, is the Ministry of Finance. Finance guys, not very great in all aspects. They are not experts in agriculture or transport or whatever. So the Technical Advisory Committee was made up of people from these various sectors who then help them in the decision-making process once the projects were sent to them. And of course, as you develop the project, there's always going to be an interaction between the project developers and, of course, the NDA and the Technical Advisory Committee. And once the project is fully developed and everybody is okay with it, then, of course, the no objection letter or approval would be given at that point. It also highlighted the role of the NDA, really, what the NDA was supposed to do, the key things, day-to-day activities that they were supposed to do, and also to set them up in context. It was important to align these things with the existing framework. So, like I said, the NDCs, the National Climate Change Policy, and of course, we also had in Ghana the National Climate Change Master Plan, which is basically the action plan for the policy. In terms of usage, the NDA Operations Manual really was used as a quick reference at the initial stages, and even now, because at the initial stages, there were still struggles with what really we are supposed to do as an NDA, and the staff really had to struggle. And so that was useful. But I think the added on thing was that it was also useful to deal with a certain kind of risk that we identified at the initial stages, the risk of staff attrition, the fact that staff members of the NDA are government, workers. They don't stay in one place forever. They could be moved to, even within the same ministry, could be moved to different sectors or different divisions. And so you needed to have something something within the NDA structure that would be more a permanent reference for the NDA in that regard. So that is what happened. Of course, in Ghana, you had, between the time we were doing this, 3 new staff members had to join the NDA, and 2 of them had to leave to join other units. So this was useful for them in that regard. So it was a permanent reference, and also it was a very useful tool when it came to stakeholder engagement at the time. I mean, all you had to do when you're doing stakeholder engagement, because this really was aligned with the existing frameworks and also indicated what the NDA was supposed to be doing, and also highlighting the in-country processes for climate finance and GCF. This was a useful tool because once you engage with people, you can highlight these things, and then you can even let them have copies, and they themselves can also build some kind of awareness in that regard. So it was very good in that regard. The key challenge, of course, was that this was done like almost 3 years ago. So things have changed. I mean, Ghana is now thinking about country program at this stage. And of course, with a country program, it means that what I indicated earlier about the process for no objection would clearly change, because then we would have identified projects already. And so you didn't need to go through the process of doing it yourself. So a lot of things would change, and that is also something that we have to handle. The other tool was the project prioritization tool, which I will not talk too much about because we'll go into prioritization a bit more tomorrow. But of course, the tool really was basically to help come to a certain kind of transparent process of identifying projects, so that if the NDA and the Technical Advisory Committee identify projects, it would be something that would not be seen as arbitrary. They would have gone through a systematic process with clear indicated criteria that then anybody can then see that this is the process they went through, and this is how come they arrived at these list of projects. So it has been used once, and that was to help us identify some key projects that we were able to then submit under the BMU-funded readiness. The next one, as I indicated, was the climate finance tracking, an MRV tool. We refer to it now in Ghana as a Climatronic. Basically, this was a tool that was built on existing accounting and management structure in Ghana. The Ghana Integrated Financial Management System, which basically is the source of area where you go through if you want to get all the data about development finance in Ghana, right? So what we had to do then was then be able to disaggregate from this kind of data the specific areas that deals with climate change. What we have in Ghana is that we have a development plan that is medium term or long term. With each development plan, you also have aligned to them specific policy objectives of the development plan. You can see it as maybe probably the action plan of your development plan. So all of these policy objectives would have to be quantified in terms of budgeting, because that is how you achieve your development plans. And for all of these, if you like, policy objectives, they are assigned specific budget codes. So the MRV system and the tracking system is based on those specific budget codes that are aligned to specific policy objectives in the development plan. I don't know if that makes sense. Yeah? So what we have done is that basically for each budget code, you have specific things, and then we have been able to use the tool to then go through a process using experts and panel of different sectors to be able to decide which of these policy objectives can be classified as high. And if it's high, it basically means that it's 100%. That means all the money that goes in there is 100% climate related. If it is medium, what this means is that maybe about half of that money is climate related. If it's low, then probably just about a fifth of it is climate related. And so for an example, just an example of one policy objective that is linked to climate change. So you have a policy objective in our current development plan that says to improve capacity to adapt to climate change impacts. That is clearly climate related. So that is 100% funded climate change activity. And linked to that, there's also the verification, because it's a total MRV system. So there's the verification aspect of it, where we are able to identify the source of the money, the scope of what this is supposed to do, the key outputs, and then the status of each of these projects in terms of that. And then the reporting structure is linked to what we have, we upgraded during the BMU Readiness. Basically, it's an online data hub that allows you to be able to track, provide information on current information in Ghana on climate change. Still has a lot of work in terms of putting data on, but I think the setup, the framework is already there for it to function. The key challenges, of course, is that the budget codes that we have in Ghana has been seen to change every 5 years. So 2017 was the 5th year after we had done what we did. We were hoping to have been able to implement it, but then the budget code changed. So it means that we have to now go back and revise the whole system. Well, not the whole system, but at least the budget coding aspect. So which is what we did. And currently, that means that we have to do another round of national training to help people to be able to get a bit more information. But I think we'll talk a bit more about that when we go into the panel discussion. The added value is that we are now looking beyond just climate GCF. It's basically about financing for the whole SDGs in Ghana. Once we are able to do this right, then we would be able to look at that bigger picture, because then we can use a similar process to be able to achieve that. The lesson, of course, is that you really need to properly risk assess some of these tools when it's being developed, because at the time we were doing this, we were not thinking too much about whether the budget codes was going to change, right? But it has changed, so we really have to deal with that. The skills aspect, so basically this focus on NDA training, staff training, where, like I said, basic climate change principles that really people needed to get a grasp of. And we had some training for staff members of the NDA team. Other skills areas and areas where we have opportunities to enhance, to build capacity, we realized was to deal with participation in international climate-related events, whether they were organized by the GCF or whether it was a COP event. We realized that these provided a lot of opportunities for the NDA to be able to engage, to better understand really the whole concept and where other countries were going. And for the NDA, I think it was very useful in that regard. Challenge there, of course, is really trying to identify, the projects the particular courses that would be relevant to NDAs, because it was always going to be a challenge, especially when you have a 2-year program and you're thinking that we need to do this early so that we can get people to start applying the skills that they learn. The coordination aspect was also basically the systems that were enhanced by either the tools or the skills. So basically the coordination, like I indicated, was how we are able to come about with clear decision-making that is also transparent using the NDA, but of course having a supporting system through a technical advisory committee that was made up of membership from different key ministries, also CSOs and also the private sector. And basically what they do was that they probably provide technical advice to the NDA. They help them to be able to come to a better understanding. And what we realized that over the course of years, for the past 2 or 3 years, these sort of discussions that they've had, technical work that they've been doing, which also involve NDA staff, were also helpful. Apart from the classroom trainings that they had, these were opportunities for them to learn from their colleagues who were also experts in their field, to be able to come to understand the context of climate change with a lot of the projects that they were getting. So the system, as we have currently of the NDA structure, is just basically what you have there. So the Technical Advisory Committee basically provides advice to the NDA Secretariat and also, of course, the GCF focal person in Ghana. And this is set up in the Ministry of Finance. So, of course, the focal person who is a director of the NDA system, will also report to a chief director in the Ministry of Finance. And also, of course, the bigger decision would have to be taken at the ministerial level, which is taken by the Minister of Finance. So when a project, for example, is selected or a decision is made to deal with a particular project, the focal person would have to take that to the Chief Director and the Minister of Finance before a decision and a ministerial approval is given for them to go ahead. The other thing on coordination was how we were also able to engage with other countries, which was also very helpful. And we had engagement with our colleagues from Nepal and very useful engagement in that regard. A lot of things were learned in that. Of course, the key takeaways, if I should put them in two, sentences, basically was about finance, mobilizing finance beyond the readiness. What should the NDAs be doing beyond readiness? How would they be able to mobilize finance? I think for Ghana, the default is that we'll rely on government of Ghana funds, but I think what we've learned is that that is not enough. So we need to think a bit more beyond that. Of course, also project funding diversification. When we started, there's a lot of the focus was on GCF. In Ghana's NDC's document, we have indicated a very ambitious goal of 22 billion for funding, 5 billion of which at the time was supposed to come from the GCF. That's 22%, right? But what that means is that you needed, beyond the 22%, at least if we are going to go with that there should be other areas where we should be getting funding from. So we needed to look beyond the GCF. We needed to look at what also exists to be able to provide, whether it's from private sector or whether it's from other institutions. We needed to look at that as well. So that was some of the key things that we took away from that. Coordination is useful, and in my regard, in terms of building capacity, but also beyond that, I think the added value is that it helps reduce turf wars and conflicts. When we chose the Ministry of Finance, or when Ghana chose the Ministry of Finance as the NDA, there were clear signs that the Ministry of Environment was not happy about that decision that was taken. But then that meant that you needed to find a way to manage that kind of potential conflict. And so when they were both put on the same team to be able to coordinate the GCF work, it allowed them to work together. The Ministry of Environment felt at the time that, okay, I am not being, kicked out of this whole process. I am actually, they were given the opportunity to actually be a co-chair in terms of the decision making. So it meant that a lot of the decision making would have to be agreed upon by them, and they were part of the process. So that allowed them, it's not just about coordination, but of course, it allows them to be able to work together with them. They saw it that, okay, if this thing doesn't work, we would be a part of it. We would be blamed as well. So we needed to work together to make sure this thing works. And that really helped the whole coordination aspect of it. The lessons really, if I was just to highlight some of them, is that really this capacity building is not just about the classroom. It's really, from what you've seen, it goes beyond that. The tools really, like I said, we need properly assess these tools to be able to make them more effective. The skills training would require that we really do an early gap assessment of what is lacking within the NDA structure, or maybe even within a support group that would provide some kind of help to this team. And that should be done early enough to be able to help you address that. Capacity building really, from what we've seen, is not a one-off. So the NDA could have, we've done a number of trainings, but it was not just, it's not a one-off because a staff can change, and you may need to do whole fresh of trainings, and so I think that was one of the challenges we had at first in Ghana. We did the training, and people were still asking, why do you want to do more trainings for the NDA? Well, because some of the staff that were trained at first had moved, so you have to do trainings for more staff in that regard. Also, of course, there should be that thinking that this is not just we are doing trainings for them and we are providing them with tools, but also opportunities to engage with other countries, and also maybe at international events like the COP also would provide them with an additional opportunity. And also, of course, using a coordination in-country system using the TAC would help enhance inclusiveness, and like I said, it really reduces conflict. So these are very good points. I think that once we are able to apply them, for Ghana, it has been useful in terms of the capacity building. Yeah, so that's that. Thank you very much. You see what I've got. The first one, this is Medase. In Ghana, is a tree language. Medase means I thank you. Of course, you. Danke, we are in Germany, so yeah.